2 hours of Neville Goddard for when you can't stop thinking about money. Hook. There is a simple test that can be run on any teaching, and it takes about a minute. Take the instructions the teacher actually printed, remove one word, and see whether anything breaks. Neville Goddard is named, almost everywhere he appears, as a man who taught people how to get money. So take his printed instructions and remove the word money. Read them again. Nothing breaks. Every sentence still stands, still means what it meant, still tells the reader to do the same thing. Now put money back and remove a different word instead. Remove the word state. Remove consciousness. Remove assumption. Remove the phrase, what a person is aware of being. Now the instructions stop being instructions at all. There is nothing left to carry out. That is the finding of this recording, and its consequence is not comfortable, because the usual account of this man names the wrong noun. The subject of his work was never the sum. It was the state a person occupies while the sum is missing. And on his account, the fact that a person cannot stop thinking about money is not a fault to be corrected. It is a reading. It is information about where they are standing, and he was more specific about what to do with it than his reputation suggests. Sautier block. Before this starts properly. This channel puts out one of these every week, so if it is useful, subscribe, and the next one will find you. And if you want to take it further than a recording can, the links in the description go deeper. That is where the material is set out in order, rather than spread across an hour and a half. That is the only interruption. Nothing else will be asked of you tonight. Section headings begin. The test that any teaching can be put through. Begin with why that substitution test is worth trusting, because a trick that proves too much proves nothing. The test works on Goddard specifically because of an unusual feature of his output. He wrote 12 short books across 27 years and barely changed the instruction in any of them. The vocabulary is small and stable, and the same handful of terms carry the whole weight from the first book to the last. That means a substitution run on any single chapter is a fair sample of the entire body of work, which is not true of most teachers in this territory. Run the test on the first book, published in 1939, and the result is stark. That book gives its reader a procedure. The procedure is to take attention away from the present condition, to rise inwardly to the condition desired, and to remain there until it feels natural rather than aspirational. Money is mentioned in that book. It is mentioned repeatedly, and unlike a great deal of what circulates under his name, the mentions are blunt. But every one of them is an illustration. Not one of them is the mechanism. Cut them all out, and the procedure survives intact, because the procedure was never about money in the first place. Now run it the other way. Take out the word consciousness or the phrase awareness of being, and the same book becomes a series of unconnected exhortations. There is no longer any account of why any of it would work, no longer any object to operate on, and no longer any instruction, because the instruction was an instruction about consciousness the entire time. This matters for a specific and practical reason, and it is not a matter of scholarly tidiness. A person who believes the subject is money will apply the method to money. They will sit down at night and try to imagine an amount. That is a reasonable thing to do if the description they were given is accurate. It is a waste of an evening if it is not, and on the evidence of his own pages it is not. What he asked people to occupy was never a figure. It was a condition of a person, and the figures in the accounts he printed arrive later, sideways, and usually in a form nobody imagined. A dancer from Barbados and 12 books. Some biography, kept short, and kept to what the surviving record actually supports. Neville Lancelot Goddard was born on the 19th of February, 1905, in St. Michael, Barbados, into a large merchant family. He left for New York City in 1922, at 17, and he did not arrive as a student of anything. He arrived as a working performer. He danced for a living. At some point in the years that followed, he met a man he refers to in print only as Abdullah, and whom he credits with turning his interest in imagination into a discipline. It is worth being exact about that name, because a great deal has been written about it that cannot be supported from anything he published. In the books that survive, he calls him a friend. He gives him no nationality. He gives him no religious office. Anybody who offers more detail than that is offering something they have added. He began speaking publicly around 1938. His first book appeared in 1939 and his 12th in 1966. The recorded lecture period runs from roughly 1948 to 1971. He married twice, had a son and a daughter, and died in Los Angeles on the 1st of October, 1972. One further fact about the record matters more than the biography does, and it matters directly to tonight's subject. Some of his books are not argument at all. They are collections of letters. People who had heard him teach wrote to him describing what they had done and what had followed, and he printed those letters in their own words, at length, signed only with initials. That is an unusual editorial decision. Most teachers of this kind of material summarize their evidence, which conveniently removes anything inconvenient from it. He printed his, including the letters where the outcome arrived in a shape the writer had not asked for, and including several where money was not what arrived at all. Which means that, on the specific question this recording is asking, what happens to money in the accounts of people who actually tried this, there is something to consult rather than something to guess at. The book he wrote in 1939. There is a detail about that first book that changes how a modern listener should hear it, and it is almost never mentioned. It was published in 1939. That is the tail end of the Depression, in a country where roughly one working person in 6 still could not find work. The book is short, barely more than a pamphlet, and its author says in the opening pages that he could have expanded it into several hundred pages and chose not to, because commands, in his phrasing, must be short and to the point. That context is not decoration. It shows up inside the text. At one point, he lists the things that loom over a person and make them feel small, and the first item on his list is unemployment. He is not writing to an audience deciding between investments. He is writing to people who cannot pay rent, in a year when that was the ordinary condition, and he is entirely unembarrassed about saying so. There is no delicacy in the book about money at all. It names poverty, it names debt, it names hunger, and it names them flatly. This is worth holding on to, because a modern listener meets this material through a filter that did not exist when it was written, and the filter has a tone, aspirational, upward, faintly embarrassed by lack. The 1939 book has none of it. Its argument to people in trouble is not that they should feel more positive. Its argument is that they have misidentified where the trouble is located. The book has never been read on this channel before. It has been named as a source 3 times, and it has never once been opened. That is worth stating plainly, because what follows leans on it heavily, and it is the most direct writing about money that exists anywhere in the material this channel can actually check. Poverty, as something a person is conscious of being. Here is the sentence the whole recording is built on. It is from that first book, and it is 1 line long. To be conscious of being poor, he writes, and to pray to a God for riches, is to be rewarded with that which you are conscious of being, which is poverty. Sit with the shape of that for a moment, because it is a strange sentence, and the strangeness is the point. It does not say that praying for money is greedy. It does not say it is unspiritual. It does not say it will be refused. It says something much odder, which is that it will be answered precisely and reliably, and that what will be delivered is the condition the person was in while they asked. The mechanism he is proposing is that a person is not given what they request. A person is given what they are. The request is noise. The state underneath it is the transmission, and the state underneath a request for money is, almost always, the state of not having any. That single claim reorganizes everything about the subject. It means a person lying awake running the numbers is not doing something ineffective. They are doing something effective, in a direction they did not choose. The hour spent worrying is not wasted effort on his account. It is well-spent effort, aimed at the wrong end. And it means the familiar advice to want it more, to focus harder, to hold the goal more fiercely in mind, is the specific action that keeps the condition in place, because wanting is what a person without does, and the more intensely they want, the more precisely they are broadcasting the state of being without. He puts the positive form of it in the same passage. Prayers, he says, to be successful, must be claiming rather than begging. And then, immediately after, the practical version, which is that a person who would pray for riches should turn away from the picture of poverty, deny the evidence of the senses, and assume the nature of being wealthy. 2 words in that instruction are doing all the work, and neither of them is riches. Assuming a nature rather than an amount. The first word is assume. The second is nature. Neither is casual, and both are technical in his usage. To assume, in his vocabulary, does not mean to suppose or to hope. It means to take on in the way a person takes on a role or a coat, and to remain inside it until it stops feeling like something taken on. He is explicit elsewhere that this is not pretending. Pretending keeps a gap open between the person and the thing pretended, and that gap is the whole problem, because the gap is where the awareness of not having lives. Pretending to be wealthy is an activity performed by somebody who knows they are not, and it therefore confirms the thing it was meant to fix. The second word, nature, is stranger and more useful. He writes that to ask in the name of a thing is to ask in its nature, and that name, throughout his reading, means nature. So the instruction to assume the nature of being wealthy is not an instruction to imagine possessing an amount. It is an instruction to occupy the disposition of a person for whom money is not the question currently being asked. That is a very specific thing, and anybody who has met such a person will recognize it. It is not extravagance, and it is not confidence about money either, which is usually a symptom of thinking about it constantly. It is an absence. Such a person does not feel rich. They do not feel anything about it at all, because the question has been settled and is no longer interesting. Money has dropped out of the foreground and become weather. This is what he is pointing at, and it is why the substitution test came out the way it did. The state he asks the reader to occupy is defined by what is absent from it rather than by what is in it. The distinguishing feature of the state of wealth in his account is not that a person is thinking pleasant thoughts about money. It is that a person is not thinking about it, which produces the uncomfortable corollary, and it needs saying now rather than at the end. A person who is thinking about money continuously, tonight at this hour, is not failing at his method. They are receiving an accurate report of the state they are standing in. The report is not the problem. The report is correct. The one place he uses the verb attract. There is a word that has attached itself to this man over the last 2 decades, and it is not his. He did not use it. He did not teach it. and correcting that is not pedantry, because the substitution reveals something. The term he used was the law of assumption. It appears throughout his work dozens of times in a single book. The other term, the one now printed on most of the merchandise bearing his face, appears in none of the books that can be checked. This is not a matter of interpretation, it is a matter of counting. But the correction is more interesting than a simple absence, because there is one place where he does use the verb, and he uses it to say the opposite of what the modern slogan says. In the 1944 book on feeling, he writes that a person never attracts what they want, but always attracts what they are conscious of being. He liked the formulation enough to state it twice in the same short book, the second time even more compactly. A person never attracts what they want, but always what they are. Read that beside the slogan it is usually confused with. The slogan says that wanting something with sufficient intensity draws it toward you. His sentence says the exact reverse. Wanting draws nothing, because wanting is the activity of somebody who does not have. What is drawn is a match for what the person already is. The verb is the same. The subject of the verb has been swapped, and swapping it inverts the entire teaching. This is why a person can spend years doing what they were told and get nowhere. They were told to want correctly. Nothing in his work suggests that wanting has any creative function whatsoever. Desire, in his account, has exactly one job, which is to tell a person what to become. After that, it is finished. And continuing to feel it is continuing to feel the absence it was announcing. Why nothing here is a promise about your finances. A plain statement, placed early rather than buried, because this subject attracts promises the way nothing else in this field does. Nothing in this recording is a prediction about anybody's money. No claim is made that listening to it or practicing what is described in it will change anybody's income, clear anybody's debts, or produce any sum at any time. There is no timetable here, and there is no timetable in his books either, which is a fact worth noticing on its own, because a method with a stated waiting period is a method that hands its practitioner a stopwatch, and he never gave anybody one. What is offered here is narrower. It is an account of what one man taught about a particular mental habit, drawn from books that can be checked, with the places where the record is thin marked as thin. It is not financial advice, it is not a plan, and it is not a substitute for one. There is a second reason to say this now, rather than at the end. The accounts printed in his books all contain figures, every one of them. People wrote to him and reported what arrived, and being people, they reported the amount. Those figures are the least instructive part of every account, and they are also the part that gets extracted, put on a graphic, and circulated without the rest of the story attached. So none of them will be repeated here, not one. When a case is described in the sections that follow, what arrived will be described in kind, rather than in quantity, and the quantity will simply be left in the book where it belongs. This is not squeamishness. It is because the argument of this recording is that the sum was never the subject, and reading the sums aloud would quietly contradict that argument while pretending to support it. Wanting money is not the same as naming an end. There is a chapter in his 1961 book with an unpromising title. It is called All Trivia, and its subject is small things: a hat, a picture, a loaf of bread. It also contains the most useful correction in the whole body of work for anybody whose problem is money, and the correction has nothing to do with size. The chapter opens with a line from Blake that general knowledge is remote knowledge, and that it is in particulars that wisdom consists. Goddard then makes it operational. People do not get definite results, he says, because they do not define definite ends. The results are uncertain when they might be perfectly certain, and the reason is a failure to discriminate. Definition, he writes, asserts the reality of the particular thing against the formless generalizations which flood the mind. Formless generalizations which flood the mind. Consider what the phrase describes, and then consider that the words more money are the most formless generalization available to a human being. They name no object. They describe no situation. They contain no scene, no room, no moment, nothing that could be seen or heard or felt. A person can hold the words more money in mind for an entire evening and never once have specified anything at all, because there is nothing there to specify. It is a direction without a destination, and on his account, a direction without a destination is precisely the thing that produces uncertain results. The correction is not to want a bigger number. It is to stop naming an amount and start naming an end. What is the money for? Not in the abstract, but concretely, in a form that could be occupied, a room in a particular condition, a conversation held in a particular tone, a morning that begins in a particular way. Those are things a person can be inside of. An amount is not a thing anybody can be inside of, which is why it makes such poor material. The formless generalization that floods the mind. It is worth pressing on this, because it explains a failure that a great many people have experienced and blamed themselves for. The common experience is this. Somebody reads about this teaching, understands it, and sits down to apply it to their finances. They close their eyes and try to feel wealthy. Nothing happens. Not in the sense that nothing arrives, but in the more immediate sense that nothing happens inwardly either. There is no traction. The mind slides off. Within a minute they are back to running the actual numbers, which at least have the virtue of being about something. That is not a failure of concentration, and it is not a lack of belief. On his own account, it is the correct response of a mind asked to occupy a generalization. Feeling wealthy is not a feeling. It is a category of feelings, in the way that feeling French is not a feeling. Ask a person to feel wealthy, and they have been given nothing to do. Ask the same person to be in a particular room, at a particular hour, having a particular thought that only somebody in a settled condition would have, and the mind has somewhere to go. He is unusually insistent on this. The great and golden rule, he quotes from Blake, is that the more distinct and sharp the bounding line, the more perfect the work, and that to leave out the line is to leave out life itself. The practical consequence for anybody whose subject is money is direct and slightly deflating. The work is not to feel more strongly about wealth. The work is to find out what specific thing is actually wanted underneath the word, which is often surprisingly modest and often not really about money at all, and then to be in that rather than to think about it. Moods treated as effects rather than causes. 2 chapters earlier in the same book, there is a heading of one word. It is called Moods, and it opens with a line from Churchill which Goddard clearly enjoyed, that this is an age in which the mood decides the fortunes of people, rather than the fortunes deciding the mood. Then his own sentence, which is the one that matters. Men regard their moods far too much as effects, he writes, and not sufficiently as causes. The ordinary assumption is that a mood is a readout. Something happens, and a person feels a way about it. Money comes in and there is relief. Money goes out and there is dread. On that assumption, a mood is a passive instrument, and the only way to change it is to change the circumstance it is reporting on, which is exactly what a person cannot currently do. He is proposing that the arrow also runs the other way, and that in practice it runs that way far more often than anybody notices. Moods, he writes, are not only the result of the conditions of our life, they are also the causes of those conditions. And then, in the same chapter, the version with teeth, a person imagining himself into a mood takes on himself the results of that mood, and if he does not imagine himself into it, he is free of the result. This is where the money question becomes concrete rather than philosophical. The mood of a person short of money is not a neutral response to a bank balance. It is a sustained inner activity with a texture, and the texture is unmistakable once it has been named. It is a rehearsal. It rehearses the conversation with the person who is owed. It rehearses the moment the card is declined. It rehearses arithmetic that has already been done 4 times today and will not come out differently on the 5th. None of that is planning. Planning ends when a decision is made. This does not end, because it was never trying to reach a decision. It is a mood maintaining itself by generating scenes that justify it, and on his account it is not idling. It is working. The woman who stopped listing what she needed. The chapter on moods prints a letter that reads like a fairy tale, and which its author begins by saying so. She is aware of how it sounds. She writes it down anyway. She was 55, out of work, and had no family to fall back on. She needed, in her own summary, just about everything. She needed a car that would run in order to look for a job, and the car she had was ready to fall apart. She was behind on the rent. She had no clothes fit to be interviewed in. Her bank account was nearly empty, and there was nobody she could ask. She had been attending his talks for about a year, and what she did first is the part worth attending to because it is what almost anybody would do. She began imagining herself having each of the things she needed, one by one, down the list. And she reports the result of that with unusual honesty. She found herself exhausted by the time she got to the end of the list, and so agitated afterwards that she could not sleep. That deserves to be sat with, because it is the most recognizable sentence in the whole account. The method, applied to a list of needs, produced fatigue and insomnia. It did not produce calm, and it did not produce results. And the reason is contained in the previous 2 sections. A list of needs is a list of absences. Going through it, item by item, is not occupying a state. It is conducting an inventory of what is missing, which is the most efficient possible way to remain conscious of being without. What she did instead came from something she had heard him say about a painter who had caught a single feeling, a kind of inner word, and held it. So she stopped working the list. She picked one feeling instead. Something wonderful is happening to me now, and she went to sleep in it. Not next week, now. She did that, by her own account, every night for 2 months, with nothing whatever happening in the meantime. What eventually happened came through a chance meeting with an acquaintance she had not seen in months and forgot about the same day, which led, a month later, to a man she had not heard from in 25 years, deciding to share what he had. She never learned why. She never contacted him. The support continued, and was later made permanent in writing. Why, the figures in these accounts are withheld. Her letter states an amount. So does every letter in these books. This is the moment to say clearly why no amount will be spoken here, because the reason is an argument rather than a scruple. The figure in that woman's letter is the least informative thing in it. It tells a listener nothing about what she did, nothing about how she did it, and nothing about whether it has any bearing on their own evening. What it does do, reliably, is become the whole story. The number is what gets remembered. The number is what gets put on a graphic. And once the number is the story, the account has been converted into a promise, which is precisely what it was not. There is a second and better reason, and it comes from her own testimony. The thing she reports changing first was not the amount in the account, it was the exhaustion. She went from a nightly inventory that left her unable to sleep to a single settled feeling she could fall asleep inside of. That change happened immediately, and it happened 2 months before anything arrived. If a listener takes one thing from that letter, it should be that, and the figure actively obscures it. So the convention from here is simple. What arrived will be described in kind: a payment, a contract, an unexpected settlement, a delivery, a seat, a picture. Never in quantity. The quantities are all in the books, in print, for anybody who wants to check the accounts rather than be sold them, and that is the correct place for them to stay. One more note on how these accounts are printed, because it governs how they can honestly be told. He published the letters signed with initials only. 2 letters, 3 letters, nothing else. No first names, no cities, no occupations beyond what the writer volunteered. That was his editorial choice, and it has a consequence for anybody retelling them now, which is that no name can be supplied, ever, because there is none to supply. Where 2 letters in different chapters happen to carry the same initials, nothing follows from that either. They are not assumed to be the same person here, because the book does not say they are. Resisting a thing and renouncing a thing. So the question becomes practical. If the preoccupation is the report, and arguing with the report does nothing, what did he actually tell people to do about a thought that will not stop? There is a chapter in the 1952 book that answers this directly, and it is 4 pages long. It is titled Renunciation, and it turns on a distinction almost nobody makes. There is a great difference, he writes, between resisting a thing and renouncing it. When a person resists it, they give it their attention, and they continue to make it real. When they renounce it, they take their attention off it and give their attention to what they want. 2 words that sound like synonyms, doing opposite work. Resistance is the strategy almost everybody adopts by default, and it has a recognizable feel. It involves telling oneself to stop, catching oneself, correcting, being frustrated at having drifted back, starting again. It has the texture of a fight, and it has the outcome of a fight, which is that both parties remain in the room. The reason it fails is mechanical rather than moral. Attention is what makes a thing real, in his account. Not approving attention of any kind. A person who spends an hour arguing with a fear has spent an hour attending to the fear, and the argument was the attendance. This is why the harder somebody tries not to think about money, the more continuously they think about money. Renunciation is not stronger resistance. It is a different action entirely, closer to leaving a room than to winning an argument. It does not deny that the bills exist. It does not pretend the balance is other than it is. It declines to keep looking and puts the looking somewhere else. He gives it an image, borrowed from a poet, and the image is a vine. An uncontrolled imagination spends its energy on useless growth, and the answer is not to argue with the branches, it is to prune them by withdrawing attention from them and to let the plant put its energy where it was directed. Effort against the senses. Strengthens the senses. The 1944 book states the same principle from the other end, and states it as something close to a physical law. When the senses confirm the absence of what a person wants, he writes, all conscious effort to counteract that suggestion is futile, and tends to intensify the suggestion. That final clause is the one that gets skipped, and it is the whole warning, not merely futile. Intensifying, the effort makes the thing worse. Anybody who has lain awake over money already knows the phenomenon, even if nobody has ever named it for them. The evening runs like this. The senses report a fact. There is not enough. A person decides to counteract that report, so they begin to insist inwardly on the opposite. And within 10 minutes, the insisting has become an argument, and the argument requires the fact to be present in order to be argued with. So the fact is now being held in mind continuously and with feeling, by the very process that was meant to remove it. He is describing the same trap from a second angle in the same passage, and it is worth having both. Whenever a person is in the state of "I should like to, but I cannot," he writes, the harder they try, the less they are able to yield. Effort, in this specific operation, is fatal, which means the standard advice given to somebody in financial distress, that they should want it more, try harder, be more disciplined about their goal, is not merely unhelpful on his account. It is a set of instructions for reinforcing the state they are trying to leave. Every unit of effort spent against the senses is a unit of attention paid to the senses. Yielding to a wish rather than forcing one. If effort is fatal, something has to take its place, and he names it. The word he uses is yielding. Prayer, he writes, is the art of yielding to the wish, and not the forcing of the wish. He is using the word prayer in a way that has nothing to do with petition. He is explicit that there is nobody being asked. What he means by it is a particular posture of mind, and he describes the posture with unusual physical precision for a man writing about consciousness. A person creates a passive state, a kind of reverie, similar to the feeling that comes just before sleep. He suggests lying flat, closing the eyes, and simply feeling sleepy until a faraway quality arrives with a general heaviness and no desire to move. Then, and only then, he says to imagine the wish fulfilled, not the route to it, not the means, not the arithmetic, simply the end, in a form that could be experienced. The reason this matters for the money question is that the posture is incompatible with the activity. A mind running figures is not passive and cannot be made passive by force, because the forcing is more activity. What he is proposing is that the mind be allowed to go quiet on its own, the way it does every single night at the point of falling asleep, and that the end be entered at that point rather than argued into place while wide awake and tense. He adds a line about it that reads almost as an aside, and is not one. Prayer, he says, is not so much what is asked for as how a person prepares for its reception. That sentence relocates the entire operation. It moves it out of the category of requesting and into the category of preparing a place. And it explains something that puzzles people about his instructions, which is why he spends so little time on the content of what to imagine and so much time on the condition a person should be in while imagining it. The condition is not a preliminary to the work. On his account, it is most of the work. When feeling and wanting disagree. There is one more sentence in that chapter, and it is the hardest one in the entire body of work for anybody in financial difficulty. It is 9 words long. Whenever feeling is in conflict with the wish, feeling will be the victor. Take that seriously, and a great deal becomes clear. It means that the wish, however clear, however detailed, however sincerely held, loses every time it is in a room with a contrary feeling. It means the imaginal act performed at 11 at night by a person who is frightened is not neutral. It is being overruled while it happens, and the thing doing the overruling is the fear, which is doing what feeling does, which is winning. He states the same thing as a general principle in the same passage. The dominant feeling invariably expresses itself. This is why the state matters more than the technique. A technique performed inside the wrong state is not a technique performed badly. It is a technique overwritten by the state it was performed inside. And it explains the common experience of doing everything correctly and getting nothing. The person did do it correctly, They visualized, they felt, they held the end. They also did all of it while afraid, and the fear was the dominant feeling in the room, so the fear is what was expressed. The answer he gives is not to feel less afraid by an act of will, which returns to the resistance problem. It is to change what is being attended to for long enough that the fear stops being fed, which is the renunciation chapter, and to enter the end at the point in the evening when the fear has naturally loosened its grip, which is the passive state described above. Those two instructions are the same instruction approached from different sides, and neither of them involves fighting anything. Attention as the measure of inner force. The chapter that supplies the mechanism for all of this is not about money at all. It is titled Attention, and it is barely 3 pages. Attention is forceful, he writes, in proportion to the narrowness of its focus. It is steadied and made powerful only by such an adjustment of mind as permits a person to see one thing only, because attention is strengthened by being confined. And then the line that is really about money without ever mentioning it. The power of attention, he writes, is the measure of inner force. That measurement is available to anybody tonight, and it does not require any belief in his metaphysics to take. Where has attention actually been going? Not where was it meant to go, where did it go? For most people whose finances are strained, the honest answer is that attention has been going to the shortfall, continuously, for weeks, with a persistence and a narrowness of focus that would be described as remarkable discipline if it had been aimed at anything else. That is the uncomfortable joke inside this subject. The person who says they cannot concentrate on an imaginal act for 5 minutes has usually just concentrated on their financial situation for 5 hours. The faculty is not absent. It is fully operational, and it is pointed at the wall. He is clear that the faculty is trainable rather than fixed, and honest about the starting condition. When a person first tries to take control of their attention, he writes, they discover how little of it they have, and how much it is dominated by sensory impressions and by drifting on the tides of idle moods. That phrase, drifting on the tides of idle moods, describes the money mind exactly, and it connects this chapter to the chapter on moods without either of them mentioning the other. A double-minded man in his own words. He puts a line from the letter of James at the head of that chapter, and the line is short. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. It is placed there for a reason, and the reason is not decorative. Double-mindedness, in the sense he is using, is not indecision about a goal. It is the condition of holding 2 states at once, and it is the ordinary condition of almost everybody who tries this material with money. The 2 states are these. In the first, the person is settled, and the matter is handled. In the second, they are checking. The first is entered deliberately for 20 minutes. The second runs by itself for the other 15 hours, and it does not feel like a state at all because it feels like realism. He is not asking for the second one to be suppressed by force, which he has already ruled out. He is pointing out what its presence costs, given that the whole force of the faculty depends on being confined to one object. A person alternating between the assumption and the audit is not doing the exercise imperfectly. They are running 2 exercises against each other. There is a phrase from his own writing that sharpens this, and it is worth stating in the correct form, because it is one of the most misquoted sentences attached to his name. What he says is that the assumption, to be effective, cannot be a single isolated act. It must be a maintained attitude of the wish fulfilled. Maintained is the operative word, and it is not the same as repeated. A repeated act is something performed at intervals, which means it is absent between the intervals, which means the other state has the rest of the day. A maintained attitude is a background condition, closer to a temperature than to an action. It is not more work. In several respects, it is less. But it is continuous, and continuity is what the double-minded man does not have. The seat she occupied before she bought one. Here is a case from the 1961 book that settles the argument of this recording more cleanly than any amount of exposition, and it is small enough to be easy to underrate. A woman wanted to see a particular performer, a mime, playing a limited run at one of the large theaters in her city. Because of the nature of the act, she wanted to be close, which meant the ground floor rather than the upper gallery. She did not have the price of a gallery seat, let alone the other kind. What she did that night is the point. She did not imagine having money for a ticket. She did not imagine a windfall, an unexpected check, or a friend offering to pay. She fell asleep watching the performance from a center seat on the ground floor, hearing the applause as the curtain went up, and feeling the excitement of being there. The next day, her financial position was unchanged. She counted what she had, and it was very little. She dressed for the theater anyway. Moving things between one bag and another, she found a small amount she had forgotten in a bag she rarely used, which was enough to cover the fuel to get there. She took that as confirmation and set off. At the theater, she looked at the prices for the good seats, and her confidence went. She walked across the road for a cup of tea, and only while sitting there remembered that there had been a cheaper price listed. She counted again, ran back, and bought the cheapest seat in the building. The usher tore her ticket and directed her upstairs. She did not go upstairs. She went into the ground floor cloakroom, sat down, closed her eyes, and kept her inward attention on the stage as seen from the floor. While she was sitting there, a group of women came in, and she overheard one of them saying that her friend had canceled at the last minute, that she had waited and waited, and that she had handed both tickets to the usher without thinking, so the spare had been torn and was now useless to give away. She got up, asked whether she might use it instead of the gallery seat she had bought, and was invited to join the party. The ticket was for the ground floor, center, 6 rows from the stage. The painter who saw red stars on a wall. Before drawing the conclusion from that, one more from the same chapter, because the two together make a pattern that one alone does not. A woman who painted and sketched had spent her working life on a particular kind of work, pictures for children's rooms, and had been told repeatedly by people with more experience than her that although the work was good, she would never be paid or recognized for that sort of thing. She had gone on believing otherwise without any idea how. What she did was specific, and it was not about being paid. Every day she imagined herself in a gallery. There was a crowd, there was noise, and on the walls there was her work and nobody else's. And on many of the pictures there were small red stars, which is what a gallery puts on a picture when it has been sold. The chain that followed is worth tracing, because none of the links are ones she could have arranged. She made a mobile as a gift for a friend. The friend showed it to somebody who owned an import shop. That man asked to meet her, and on seeing the first painting she brought, offered her a show of her own work in the spring. At the opening, one decorator commissioned a piece, and a second offered to introduce her to the galleries and buyers who would handle her work properly. She notes, in the letter, that the 3 men appeared to come out of nowhere, and that she had made no effort to contact anybody during the period she was imagining. Now put the 2 accounts side by side. In one, a woman wanted to see a performance and imagined the seat. In the other, a woman wanted a career and imagined the room. Neither of them imagined money. In the first case, no money arrived at all, and the outcome was delivered by a stranger with a spare ticket. In the second, money arrived eventually as a consequence of a market that did not previously exist for her, and it arrived after the recognition rather than before it. That is the pattern, and it is consistent across the accounts in these books. The end is imagined. The money, if money is involved at all, turns out to be one of the means, and the means are the part nobody arranged. The case that cuts against this argument. Now the honest part, because there is a case in the same chapter that appears to say the opposite, and leaving it out would be exactly the selective quoting this recording spent its opening minutes objecting to. A man ran a small business on his own, and in a period of general downturn his sales had fallen steadily for months. He was badly in debt, and his auditors had advised him to close and salvage what he could. By his own description, he was frankly skeptical of the whole idea, and he tried it only because he was desperate. And what he imagined was an amount. He imagined his office receiving a particular sum in unexpected remittances, larger than anything he had taken in months, and he held that picture steadily for 3 days. On the fourth morning, a customer he had not heard from in a long time telephoned and asked him to come in person and bring an old quotation for machinery. He dug it out and went. The customer signed the order. He could see no immediate help in it because the equipment would take months to arrive and payment would not normally be due until delivery. At the door, the customer stopped him and handed him a check covering the whole thing in advance, explaining that he wanted it paid now for tax reasons. The letter ends with a line that has to be read as well, because it is the part that will bother a careful listener. He writes that he now knows his imagination could have brought 10 times that amount into his business just as easily. So there it is. A man imagined a figure, held it for 3 days, and a figure arrived. That does not fit the tidy version of the argument this recording has been making, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. What that account does and does not establish. So take it seriously and ask what it actually shows, because it shows something, and it does not show what it seems to show. Start with what is genuinely there. He imagined an amount, and an amount came. That is what the letter says, and there is no reason to soften it. Goddard printed it without comment or apology, alongside letters where nothing resembling money arrived at all, which is itself evidence about how he understood the material. He was not curating for a thesis. Now look at the shape of the thing. What he imagined was not the number sitting in an account. What he imagined was his office receiving remittances, which is a scene, a place, an activity, a normal morning in a business that is working. The amount was the specification of that scene rather than the object of it. He was not trying to feel wealthy. He was being in a functioning business, and a functioning business has receipts. That is the same structure as the theater seat. The woman did not imagine money because money was not what she wanted. She wanted to be in the seat. He did not want an amount in the abstract either. He wanted a solvent business. And for a business, the natural, particular, definite form of solvency is money coming in. The end was named in the correct unit for that end, which gives the actual rule, and it is more useful than either extreme. Money is a poor object of imagination when it is standing in for something unspecified, which is most of the time. It is a perfectly good one when it is genuinely the particular thing wanted, in a context where it is the natural form of the outcome. The question is not whether money is allowed. The question is whether the person has done the work of finding out what they actually want, or has stopped at the word money, because stopping there is easier than thinking. And the closing line of his letter, about 10 times as easily, is best read as what it is: a man's enthusiasm shortly after something unexpected has happened to him. It is not a claim Goddard makes anywhere in his own voice. Where a correspondent's excitement outruns what the teacher himself ever asserted, the correspondent's excitement is not evidence. A hat, a painting, and a loaf of bread. Back to the chapter called All Trivia, which prints 3 short accounts in a row, and prints them for a reason that only becomes clear at the end. The first is from a woman he describes as having everything, financially and socially settled, who says she had never once used any of this for the getting of things and decided it would be amusing to try. She chose a hat from a magazine, cut out the picture, propped it on her dressing table, studied it, then closed her eyes and wore it, in imagination, walking out of the house in it. She did that exactly once. The following week, she met friends for lunch, and one of them was wearing that hat. The day after, it arrived by messenger, with a note from the friend saying she did not particularly care for it, did not know why she had bought it, and thought it would suit her better. The second is longer. A couple had built a house on a cliff over the sea and spent everything doing it. They wanted one useless thing for it, a painting of a clipper ship, and had left a wall unpaneled to hold it. Everything practical came first, so the picture waited, and both of them went on seeing it there. She found the painting in a gallery at a price that was out of the question. The next day her husband kept an appointment he had not wanted to keep, in one of the poorest houses he had ever entered, and conducted what he admitted was a sloppy interview because he could not take his eyes off the picture on that wall. The client signed, paid what he could, and when the husband mentioned that the payment appeared to fall a little short, offered him the picture in exchange for covering the difference, saying it had been in the house when he took it and he did not want it. The shortfall turned out to have been an error on the husband's side. There was nothing to cover. The third is 4 sentences long. A woman, during a transport strike, had walked a long way and knew there was no shop on her altered route home. She had enough for a makeshift dinner, but needed bread and could not face another walk. She stood still for a moment and let a picture of bread occupy her mind, then went on. On the bus, she took the first free seat and nearly sat on a paper bag, looked inside it, and found a loaf of the brand she always bought. Trifles, delivered without the usual means. He puts a single comment under those 3, and it is the reason the chapter exists. Trifles, he writes. All trifles. But they produce their trivia without price. Imagining accomplished these things without the means generally reputed necessary to do so. Without the means generally reputed necessary. That is the phrase, and it is the argument of this entire recording compressed into 7 words. In every one of those 3 accounts the thing wanted arrived, and in not one of them did it arrive by the route a sensible person would have planned. Nobody bought the hat. Nobody purchased the painting. Nobody went to a shop for the bread. In each case, the object appeared through a channel that could not have been arranged and would not have been thought of. This is why he chose small things to make the point with. Nobody is emotionally invested in a hat. Nobody is frightened about a loaf of bread. That removes the pressure and lets the mechanism be seen clearly. In a way it cannot be seen through the distortion of something a person is desperate for. And the money conclusion follows without needing to be argued. If the ordinary means are not how these things arrive, then money, which is the ordinary means, is not the channel to be watched. A person fixed on money as the route is watching one door in a building with an unknown number of doors, and watching it with the intensity that comes from having no alternative. The accounts in these books are almost uniformly about something coming through a door nobody was watching. The mood that changed before anything did. One more account, from the chapter on moods, and it is included for a single detail near the end of it. A woman traveling to visit her adult daughter found her in serious financial distress and needing a considerable sum immediately. The mother offered to borrow it and was refused. What the daughter asked for instead was help in her mother's way, meaning the thing she had heard her mother describe. So the two of them agreed on something to do together. They settled on a scene of money coming toward the daughter from every direction, and they held it, by the mother's own account, always with a feeling of gladness for everybody involved, and with no thought at all about where it would come from. Here is the detail. The mother writes that the idea caught fire with her daughter, and that she was transformed back into the confident and happy person she had naturally been, and then adds the phrase, "that matters," though there was no evidence of any real money coming in at the time. The mood changed first. The circumstances had not moved at all. Nothing had arrived, nothing had been promised, and by every external measure, the situation was identical to what it had been that morning. What had changed was which state the daughter was standing in, and that changed within days. What followed came through the mother's own mother, a woman in her 90s, who on the day before had independently decided to give away what she had in cash to the people she loved while she was still alive to see them enjoy it, and who had already written out the checks before anybody arrived. Whatever a listener makes of the sequence, the reportable fact in that letter is the ordering. The state moved before the world did. That is the ordering this recording has been describing from the beginning, and it is the only part of the account that is any use to anybody. How wealth gets rated against nothing real. He ends the chapter of small things with a sentence that would be easy to walk past, and it may be the most radical line in the book. Man rates wealth, he writes, in a way that bears no relation to real values. And then, immediately, a line from Isaiah, which he clearly chose on purpose. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Consider what he is doing there. He has just printed 3 accounts in which people received things without paying for them, and he closes by pointing out that the scale everybody uses to measure worth is calibrated against nothing. Not that money is evil. Not that wanting things is low. Something more disorienting, that the number attached to a thing and the thing itself have come apart, and that the number is the part everybody attends to. For anybody lying awake tonight over money, that has a specific and immediate application. Take whatever the sum is that is causing the trouble. That sum, as a number, is not what is causing the distress. What is causing the distress is what the number is standing for, which is usually one of a very small set of things, a room that has to be kept, a person who must not be let down, a conversation that would be humiliating, or simply the exhaustion of never being able to stop calculating. Those are the real values, and on his account, those are the things that can actually be occupied, because each of them has a form. A number does not have a form. It cannot be entered, lived in, or felt, which is why it makes such a poor thing to hold in mind and such an excellent thing to worry about. The instruction that comes out of this is not to stop caring about money. It is to notice that the caring has been aimed at a symbol, and that behind the symbol there is a definite thing which is the actual subject and which has been going unnamed. The widow, the empty vessels, and the debts. The 1939 book closes with 2 old stories that he retells for exactly this purpose, and the second of them is the one that speaks to debt. A widow, he says, is asked what she has in the house, and answers that she has almost nothing, a few drops of oil. She is told to go and borrow vessels from her neighbors, to shut the door behind her, and to begin pouring. She pours from the little she has into every borrowed vessel, and fills them all, and there is oil remaining. His reading of it is not devotional, and it is not sentimental. He points at 2 moves in the story and says they are the whole instruction. The first is that she recognizes the something rather than the nothing. Asked what she has, she does not say she has nothing. She names the small amount that is actually present. That is not optimism. It is accuracy of a specific kind, and it is difficult, because a person in financial trouble almost always reports their position as nothing when it is not nothing, and reporting it as nothing is itself an assumption being made. The second is the door. Shutting the door, he says, means shutting out the evidence of the senses that keep reporting the empty measures, the debts, the problems, not denying that they exist, closing the door on them for a defined period, which is a different act. And then he says what to do with the room once the door is shut, and it is not what anybody expects. He does not say to calculate, or to plan, or even to visualize a solution. He says to begin to feel the gladness of having already received, which the oil in the story stands for. It is a small and old story, and it maps onto an ordinary evening. The measures are the accounts. The door is the decision to stop looking at them for an hour. The pouring is what a person does with the hour, which on his account is not problem-solving. It is occupying the condition that would follow the solution. Turning the back on what is in the room. He pairs it with another, and this one he applies to money by name. A man is in a den of lions and does the one thing nobody in a den of lions does, which is to turn his back on them and face the light coming from above. Goddard's comment is direct. If a person found themselves in that den, he says, they would have no other concern in the world but lions. They would not be thinking about a single other thing, and yet the story records the man turning away from them entirely. Then he makes the application himself, and the words are his. While imprisoned within the den of poverty, take attention away from the problems of debts and dwell on the thing sought. That is as blunt as this material gets, and it is the renunciation chapter arriving 13 years earlier from a different direction. The lions are not argued with, fought, negotiated with, or explained. They are also not denied. The man in the story does not claim there are no lions. He stops looking at them and looks at something else, for as long as it takes. He does not pretend that is easy when the lions are real. He says explicitly that if a person looks back in consciousness at the problem, the work is undone, and that continuing without looking back is what faith means in his usage. Not belief in a proposition. The practical ability to keep facing the other way while something frightening is still in the room. Anybody who has tried this with money will recognize how short the intervals are at first. A minute of facing away, then a glance back. That is not failure. On his account, it is the exact faculty described in the chapter on attention, which he says is weak at the start in everybody and which is trainable. What he did with the idea of tithing. There is a short passage in that first book that is unlike anything else in it, and it is included here because it shows how completely he relocated the subject. He takes up the practice of giving away a fixed portion of income, and he is unusually sharp about how it is taught. Teachers of all kinds, he writes, have enslaved people with it, and they have done so because they did not understand it and were themselves afraid of not having enough. Then he reinterprets the whole thing, and the reinterpretation is characteristic. The one being given to, he says, is a person's own awareness, which means everybody is already doing it, constantly, and what is being handed over is not a portion of income, it is a quality. Whatever a person claims themselves to be, they have given to that awareness, and it returns what was given. So his instruction is not to give more away. It is to notice what is being handed over, and to hand over something else. The passage matters here for one reason. It is the moment where a subject everybody assumes is about money is removed from the domain of money entirely and put back into the domain of what a person is. That is the same operation he performs on prayer, on giving, on fortune, and on poverty. And it is the same operation the substitution test at the start of this recording exposed. Wherever the ordinary reading is transactional, his reading is about state. Every time, across 27 years and 12 books. Free will as the choice of an assumption. A question arrives at about this point in any honest treatment of this material, and he wrote a chapter answering it in 1952. It is called Free Will. The question he takes is exactly the one a listener will be forming. What should be done between assuming something and its arrival? His answer is one word: nothing. He goes further, and this is the part that troubles people. It is a delusion, he says, that beyond assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, a person can do anything at all to help it along. And then, more provocatively, the illusion of free will to do is ignorance of the law upon which all action is based. Read carelessly, that sounds like fatalism, and it is not, because of what he says next. Free will, in his account, means freedom to select an idea. That is where it lives, and that is the entire territory of it. A person has, in his phrasing, infinite free will in choosing their assumptions and no power to determine conditions and events. That distinction relocates effort rather than abolishing it. It does not say a person is powerless. It says the power sits earlier than where people habitually spend it, and that all the exertion normally applied to arranging outcomes is applied downstream of the only decision that was ever available. The consequence for money is not passivity. It is that the labor of the evening is a choice rather than a campaign. The choice takes moments. What takes hours, and what most people do instead, is the campaign. He puts the whole thing in one line elsewhere in the same chapter, and it is the best summary of his position on effort that exists in print. A person wins by assumption, he writes, what they can never win by force. The question of whether anybody deserves it. There is an objection that arrives before all the others for a certain kind of listener, and it is not intellectual. It is the suspicion that wanting money is something to be ashamed of, and that a person in difficulty has no business asking for more than they need. He deals with it twice, and he is not gentle about it. In the last chapter of the 1939 book, he says it flatly. Stop asking yourself whether you are worthy or unworthy to receive what you desire. His reason is structural rather than encouraging. The desire was not created by the person. It formed in them because of what they are currently conscious of being, in the way hunger forms in somebody who has not eaten. Asking whether one deserves it is asking whether one deserves to be hungry. Then, in the 1961 book, he says something almost startling in a spiritual writer. Desire, he writes, is an awareness of something lacking that would make life more enjoyable, and desires always have some personal gain in view. And then the sentence itself, there is no really unselfish desire. He does not present that as a failing, but as a fact about the structure of wanting, including wanting on behalf of somebody else, which he says is still the satisfaction of a desire of one's own. Where he does draw a line is elsewhere, and it is not about deserving. It is about the moment an imaginal act stops being about a person's own end and becomes an attempt to influence somebody else's behavior. At that point, he says in the same book, the effort of imagination has become an effort of will, and the art is perverted into tyranny. That is the only prohibition he issues in this territory, and it has nothing to do with modesty about money. Where this teaching can be fairly doubted. 3 doubts deserve a straight answer rather than a defense, and none of the 3 has a fully satisfying one. The first is the obvious one. Every account in these books was selected by the man whose teaching they support, from letters written by people who already believed him, and printed without any of the letters from people who tried the same thing and reported nothing. That objection cannot be answered. It can only be stated. What can be said in mitigation is narrow. He printed accounts in which nothing happened for long stretches, and accounts in which the outcome arrived in a shape the writer had not asked for, which is not what a person building a clean case does. But the selection problem stands. The second is that every one of these outcomes has an ordinary explanation available. A friend had a spare ticket. A relative decided to give away her savings. A customer wanted to settle a bill early. A skeptical reading of the whole collection is that people did normal things and afterwards drew a line back to an evening they had spent imagining. That reading cannot be refuted from the page, and it is not being refuted here. The third is the honest one about this recording. Nothing said here demonstrates that any of it works. What has been demonstrated is narrower, and it is the only claim being made, that the thing he actually taught is not the thing his name is now attached to, that the subject of it was a state rather than a sum, and that a person applying it to a number is applying it to the one object in the whole system that he consistently declined to make the object. That claim can be checked. It requires no belief. It requires reading his sentences and counting his words, and anybody who wants to disagree with it has a very short reading list to disagree from. What this does not excuse anybody from doing. There is a way of misusing all of this that needs naming before the end, because the material invites it, and because the invitation is strongest for exactly the people this recording is addressed to. Nothing here is an argument for not opening the letters. Nothing here suggests that a person should stop working, stop looking for work, stop paying what they can pay, stop negotiating with the people they owe, or treat a genuine emergency as an illusion to be out-imagined. Renouncing a preoccupation is not the same as abandoning a responsibility, and the difference between them is not subtle. One is a decision about where attention goes during the hours when nothing can be done anyway. The other is a decision to stop acting during the hours when something can. He is not ambiguous about this, and it would be convenient to pretend otherwise. His own accounts are full of people doing ordinary things. The woman who wanted the seat still got dressed and traveled to the theater and bought the cheapest ticket she could afford. The businessman still dug the old quotation out of his files and drove across town the same day. The painter still made the mobile, still met the shop owner, still brought her samples. In not one of these accounts does somebody stay in bed. What is absent from all of them is not action. It is the campaign of anxious action that a frightened person mounts, the fifth recalculation, the constant checking, the arrangement of contingencies for contingencies. That is what he asks people to stop, and he asks them to stop it on the grounds that it is not planning and never was. And if any of this is being heard at a moment of real crisis, the correct thing to say is the ordinary thing. This is a recording about what one man wrote. It is not advice, it is not a plan, and where a situation needs a person with actual expertise, it needs a person with actual expertise. An exercise he printed for the attention itself. There is one concrete exercise in these books that has nothing to do with imagining an outcome, and it is the right one to end on, because the argument of this recording has been that the outcome was never the problem. It appears in the chapter on attention, and its purpose is stated plainly. It is not for getting anything. It is for developing the faculty in the way a specific exercise develops a specific muscle. Here it is. At night, just before drifting off, hold attention on the events of the day in reverse order. Start with the last thing done, which is getting into bed, and move backwards through the day, event by event, until reaching the first thing, which is getting out of it that morning. He says frankly that it is not easy, and anybody who tries it will find within about 90 seconds that he is telling the truth. The mind will not go backwards. It wants to run forwards, and given the slightest opportunity, it will leave the day altogether and start on tomorrow, which for most people means the arithmetic. That resistance is the entire value of it. It is a small, unimportant, low-stakes demonstration of exactly how little control a person currently has over where attention goes, conducted on material that carries no fear at all. Nobody is frightened of remembering what they had for lunch, which means for once the faculty can be exercised without the exercise being contaminated by the thing it will eventually be used on. And there is a side effect that is not incidental. A person doing this is occupied. Attention has somewhere definite to be during the exact window in which it would otherwise be running figures. He does not present it that way. But anybody whose difficulty is that the money returns the moment the lights go off will notice it within one night. The shape of an ordinary evening from here. Here is the whole of it, gathered up, and it fits in a small space. He taught that a person receives what they are conscious of being, rather than what they ask for, which means that a request made from lack delivers lack, reliably and without malice. He taught that the state of wealth is not a quantity of feeling about money, but the absence of the question, and that therefore the persistence of the question is a report on which state a person is standing in. He taught that the report is not to be argued with, because arguing with it is attention paid to it, and attention is what makes a thing real. He distinguished resisting from renouncing, and asked for the second one. He said that effort against the evidence of the senses intensifies the evidence. He said that when feeling and wanting disagree, feeling wins. He said that the mood is the cause and not merely the effect. He said that the ends worth imagining are particular ones, and that money on its own is not a particular anything, but a generalization with nothing inside it. And in every account he printed, the thing wanted arrived, when it arrived, without the means generally reputed necessary to do so. None of which is a promise about anybody's finances, and none of it is offered as one. It is what a man wrote between 1939 and 1961, and it can be checked page by page. What it leaves, for tonight, is small, and it is not dramatic. Notice that the calculating has been going on, and that it has not been planning for some hours. Notice that it is a state reporting itself, rather than a fault. The measures are what they are, and the door can be shut on them for 1 hour without anything getting worse. And in that hour, rather than reaching for an amount, find the particular thing the amount was standing for. A room, a morning, a conversation that does not have to be had. Then be there, quietly, the way a person is in a place, rather than the way a person looks at one, and let the evening go where it goes. The lions do not have to leave the room, they only have to be behind you.